folks, I hope your day is going well, and if it isn't, it just makes my job easier. A lot of people have bemoaned the way that Hollywood has chosen to go about adapting our favorite video games into movies. Allow me to pile on. Movies based on video games generally suck out loud. Everybody knows why. It's because oftentimes some Hollywood executive sees a famous property in the game world and wants to cash in on the success of said property. Then oftentimes the movie turns out to be less than stellar. Maybe they did a bad job with it, maybe they didn't market it well enough, maybe it did make some money, just not enough to significantly call it a success. And just because they didn't strike gold with the masses, the studios are like, well, this video game movie didn't make money, so we will not make video game movies anymore. And instead they'll opt out for, excuse me, they'll opt out for sequeling a movie that came out 20 years ago, or they'll opt out for remaking a film that isn't really all that old. And then people like myself are left to make videos like this complaining about the state of video game-based movies. Ironically, this is the same sorry, sad state of affairs that comic book films, and especially superhero comic book films, used to find themselves in. I'm going to give you guys completely free of charge right now a customized 10-step program to starting good film adaptations of our favorite video games. Step 1. Stop the cash grabbing. Audiences, for the most part, are not stupid. When we see a trailer, we can pretty much figure out whether or not the movie's sole purpose is to print money. A movie comes out, a handful of people see it, word of mouth spreads, and your ham-fisted attempts at cash grabbing are then thwarted. Instead of dedicating your time and money to stealing everybody else's time and money, just focus your time and money on making the best possible movie you can with the material given. When people see that you actually put some effort into it, positive word of mouth will spread, more people will go to see the film, and by proxy, your film will be able to print money. Step 2. Hire qualified directors. It's not always your best idea, in your best interest, to hire video kids, people who've only got a handful of movies under their belt, or people who've only got a handful of successful movies under their belt. The only successful movie Paul Anderson had under his belt between 5 or 6 films before he did Resident Evil was Mortal Kombat. Yes, I know Mortal Kombat was the first video game-based movie we could legitimately call a good film, but was there any reason to not hire George Romero to do Resident Evil? He created the modern zombie film genre, which the earliest entries in the Resident Evil franchise take partial inspiration from. He was the perfect pick to do the Resident Evil film, to write and direct it. The only 3 movies that Andrei Bartkowiak had under his belt before he did Doom did not qualify him to do that film, because they were just Romeo Must Die, Cradle to the Grave, and Exit Wounds. Did you idiots not watch the movie Alien? Ridley Scott could be considered one of the best horror movie and sci-fi movie directors of all time from that film alone. He's a critically acclaimed director. I'm just saying, it would usually be in your best interest to hire more qualified directors, people who are known to have worked in the particular film genre that your adaptation is supposed to be in. Let's say George Romero for Resident Evil, Ridley Scott for Doom, Sam Raimi for Alone in the Dark, Troy Duffy for Max Payne, John Carpenter for Blood Rain, and so on and so forth. Step 3. Never hire Uwe Boll to work at any capacity on any of your films. This should pretty much be common sense. Don't hire him ever. Don't let him anywhere near the project. Your movie is pretty much guaranteed to fail the second he signs on as producer, director, or both. At this point, hiring Uwe Boll to do your video game movies is like hiring Cheech and Chong to safeguard your weed stash. You're pretty much begging for a catastrophe. Step 4. Watch Mortal Kombat. Yes, I'm coming back to this one. For his second film, Paul Anderson actually, I'll admit, did a pretty good job at not only reinterpreting the story of the original Mortal Kombat game, but in capturing the very bare essences of what made the first 2 Mortal Kombat games really good. Yes, the movie feels like a cheap 80s Hong Kong kung fu flick with Hollywood production values, if that's even a friggin' thing. But that's to be expected when you're doing a film that's an adaptation of a button masher fighting game. Like I said, it was the first video game movie we could legitimately call a good film. Hell, the trailer to Mortal Kombat is actually 1,000 times more entertaining than maybe 75% of all the video game movies that Hollywood has pinched off over the last 21 plus ever-loving years. And that includes Paul Anderson's Resident Evil films and that crappy Mortal Kombat sequel. Could have been amazing, but they screwed it up completely. Step 5. After you're done with Mortal Kombat, watch Tomb Raider, Silent Hill, and Prince of Persia. Take notes. Step 6. Have the writers and directors play the games they're signing on to adapt. They don't need to be able to speed run through it or have it mastered in some way, but a little bit of source material can certainly go a long way. Going back to my previous mentioning of Resident Evil, I do have to give Paul Anderson credit for one thing. He actually does play the Resident Evil games. He is a pretty big fan of the franchise, and it shows in his films. The problem, though, is that he has his own quote-unquote artistic vision of what a Resident Evil movie should be like, which explains why his movies are less adaptation and more fan fiction. Christoph Gans, a better example. Christoph Gans, the director of Silent Hill, is a huge fan of Silent Hill. He pursued the rights to do the film for more than 5 years. He used music cues and sound effects lifted straight out of the games, and in some cases actually remixed and remastered at some capacity, or rearranged. During production, on days when they were shooting, he would show his cast and crew actual footage of the video games running live off of PlayStation 2 to give them a basic feel of the source material. The man is a huge Silent Hill fan, and it shows up in spades in his 2006 film. Step 7. Hire people from the company that develops the game you're adapting as a liaison between the developers and the studio. In fact, why not get the companies themselves in on the action? I mean, Capcom always produces film adaptations or helps co-produce film adaptations of their properties, like Street Fighter and Resident Evil. The problem, though, is that they seem to think of video game-based movies as cheap tools to sell more video games. In fact, actually, a much better example, Jordan Mechner, the creator of Prince of Persia, co-produced and actually wrote the screen story for the Prince of Persia film. In fact, I understand that Ubisoft, who owns, last time I checked, owns the Prince of Persia video game license, has created a special, film production division of the company to work on film adaptations of their video games, presumably so they can have more creative control over the final product. I'm guessing they decided to come up with this little bright idea after Uwe Boll's initial .45 caliber anal violation by the name of Far Cry. Let's not forget that Boll has a really bad habit of downright dismissing the source material and dismissing what fans want to see and what makes a really good movie when he does his quote-unquote adaptations. Pretty much every single comic book, this is a good comparison, every single comic book movie that comes out nowadays has a liaison from DC or Marvel or whoever to serve as the liaison between the company and the studios that are making the film to make sure that the final product, movies like The Avengers and Man of Steel, are as authentic a cinematic experience as humanly possible. Granted, we still get the occasional Jonah Hex, Daredevil, or Spawn, but that's primarily from studio interference, which is a whole other story. Step 8. Look for the games that would work as a film. Just because it's a successful game doesn't mean it should be turned into a movie. Some games are just screaming to be turned into films. Some games could work, but that potential is very limited. And then there are some games that basically have no business being turned into films whatsoever. I don't want to automatically just start dropping names, but I understand that Hollywood is licensing for film adaptations of Angry Birds and Temple Run. In fact, next year we're going to be having either two or three video game movies dropping. I know there's a Hitman remake coming out in February. I know there's an Assassin's Creed movie coming out in August. I think there's a Warcraft movie coming out. It's either coming out next year or 2016. I'm not sure. I also understand that Ubisoft is currently licensing for more film adaptations of their properties, And we're gonna have some more, and these following properties are on the fence about getting a film adaptation. Now, with the exception of Rabbids, I can't see the potential that these games have in being turned into successful movies. Unfortunately, many slick suits in Hollywood seem to think of popular video games as just cheap excuses to coin money. Like the guy over at Good Bad Flicks, I'm pretty positive there's somebody in Hollywood trying to get the filmmaking rights to Candy Crush. In fact, I have a friend, I'm not, and this is no joke, I'm not throwing this in to be funny or sarcastic, as much as I wish I was, but I have a friend of mine who's been trying to convince me for the last 3 or 4 years, give or take, that I should attempt, as a guy who wants to do films and primarily wants to work on video game films, that I should try to do a Tetris movie. A Tetris film. With Adrian Brody as the straight piece, Jodie Foster as the L piece, Kevin Smith as the square piece, and Christopher Walken as the zigzag piece. Folks, I only wish I was making this up. Step 9. Don't try to please everybody. There are gamers out there who are going to hate you just because you decided to adapt their favorite video games into films. They know there are certain changes that need to be made if the film can potentially work as a film, and they're going to pretty much whine and complain and moan and groan at you and hate you for life and probably send you death threats just because you couldn't follow the game exactly down to the letter. They do not understand that video games and movies are two completely different things. These people are not your target audience. There are filmgoers out there who will refuse to take your movie seriously just because of the source material. There are people like Roger Ebert out there who think that video games haven't evolved beyond Pac-Man or Asteroids or Pong, and thus are incapable of telling a good cinematic story. These people are not your target audience either. If anything, the target audience should be you. Don't worry about the slick suits. Don't worry about faceless blobs from some friggin' focus group. Just concentrate on making a movie that pleases you, the writer-director, as an audience. That's it. One of my favorite quotes from Jerry Bruckheimer, who produced the Prince of Persia film, and he's produced a number of other big Hollywood blockbuster films, is this. Quote, "If I made films for the critics, or for anyone else, I'd probably be living in some small Hollywood studio apartment." Step 10. Understand that your movie is not automatically guaranteed to be a success. Yes, we've had these kind of films that have struck with the general audience. But we've also had some not-so-big hits. And some outright bombs. Not counting anything Uwe Boll's ever pinched off, or the Super Mario Brothers film. The first ones that come to mind are... Look, studios, be realistic. Your movie is not guaranteed to strike gold with an audience. Maybe you don't market it well enough, or maybe it opens against another, much bigger movie from a more well-known franchise in the film world. Audiences are more liable to move over to go see the film with the title they're familiar with, as opposed to taking a gamble on a property that either they don't know or they don't know all that well. Just make the best possible movie you can and market the crap out of it. If it's not a major success, don't think of it being, well, it's because it's just another video game movie. Like I said, not every single movie you make is guaranteed to be an automatic success story. Just follow these 10 easy steps, and I am fully confident that you can elevate the medium of video game movies to the same popularity as our modern superhero comic book films. Which is a good thing, because Hollywood's going to need something to fall back on once the whole comic book movie craze, the whole superhero comic book movie craze finally grinds down to a stuttering halt. Which I estimate will come about sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. Of course, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I want to know what you think out there in YouTube land. Leave me a comment and a private message. Like, favorite, subscribe, whatever you choose. I am Chris the Liberty Gamer saying so long. Have a good one.